Hi, everyone. Welcome to eMediaChat, where everything is digital. Right, Kirsten?
Totally.
Totally. Oh, you're a person of few words today. Here we go. And here we are again. Well, welcome to the show. We've got a great one today. Kirsten, would you like to do the honors?
Yes, we have digital media and technology specialist Scott Carrey. And the thing I love about Scott, and the reason why I was so happy to have him come on the show, and I'm going to read it right from the other monitor here. His tagline, I translate between suits, geeks, and artists. And that's the coolest thing I have heard ever. So, Scott Carrey. Hi, Scott.
Hi. Good morning. Good morning, Rick. Good morning, Kirsten. Good morning.
Good morning.
Audience, world, everyone out there. And thank you for the feedback on the tagline. It sort of, in a nutshell, defines the focus of what I feel is something fairly unique about what we do, which is we delicately dance between business, technology, and the creative process, or the suits, the geeks, and the artists.
Yep. When did you come up with that?
It was probably, social media often forces us, I think, to come up with various statements, and it probably, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years, I'm trying to think back when LinkedIn may have came on the radar. It's weird to think that some of these things we take for granted as being always a part of our world are actually, in most cases, less than 10 years old.
I know.
In some cases, less than 5 years old.
Yeah. And now they're you can imagine living without them.
Exactly.
So you've been in production, you've been in film and TV and everything for how long?
I've got to date myself here. No.
Oh, no. Well, you started when you were 4.
Yes, exactly.
So.
For well over 25 years, and actually joking about, started when I was 4, I technically did actually pick up my first film camera when I was about 7. And interestingly, well, I find it interesting, is that I always kind of had this sense of what we would now sort of consider a medium agnostic approach, or sort of a convergence approach. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's always been about what is the story you're trying to tell, whether that's printing a flyer or making a movie, that you have content and then you have the presentation of that content, but the medium was not really that important. Of course, that's not the way the rest of the world saw things. But in answer to your question, I generally say, well over 25 years, playing in various different, forms of content, from worked in print, worked in traditional film. If anybody remembers what that actually was, that just,
back in the day.
Yeah, the joke now is that film is that thing in the ring of your bathtub. But on a serious note, it actually, as we move into the digital world, one of the big issues that comes up a lot is how are we going to archive material? And if anybody has any zip drives on their shelf, or even floppies, or anything that you might think back, like, well, how am I even going to get that material? It's even a bigger issue when you're dealing with entertainment content that you might want to repurpose later. And I hear a lot of discussions that maybe the thing to do is actually take all this digital content and put it back on film, because we know film can last for at least 100 years, and it's probably the most standardized format anywhere on our planet.
Yeah, I've actually heard that. I've heard that argument before.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that with film, well, not with film, but with digital, the services that do back up stuff have failed. They've actually gone under. And so all your stuff may not be where you think it is sometimes, and that's a little risky.
It is, it's redundancy is something that I preach a lot.
Yeah.
Of course, when I lose stuff myself, I have no excuses. But it is a big issue, and certainly at the if you're making your living building media libraries or repurposing content, not only is it the failure rate of needing to get that back, but it's an issue of, even if you can get it back, is there, has everyone switched over to a different platform, and all of a sudden that format doesn't even read? So you have a file, but it's just a big, large file that you can't even access. So at the studio level, there's a lot of mandates where if you have a certain delivery file format, whether that's, let's say, a JPEG 2000 or MPEG or whatever compression format, that gets backed up to some form of optical drive, and the actual optical drive machine and the drivers and a computer gets shrink wrapped and put on the shelf.
Yep.
It's almost like sending an exploratory ship up into space, and if aliens find it, they can then recreate the message that we tried to leave them.
Do you know which film it was? I was watching one that was talking about the original Star Wars versus the newer Star Wars, and the difference between filming on film and filming direct to digital. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it was talking about that, about the differences in film technique and quality and backup issues and everything.
At the core of it, I think that there's a tendency to overcomplicate, and the focus really should be still back on what's the story we're trying to tell, and where's the paintbrush of today. Or I equate it a lot to, if I learned how to drive a car, driving a Chevy, and you give me a Toyota, I shouldn't go, I can't drive. I should just go, where's the button that does this and that? On the other hand, when you're dealing with an optical and photochemical process versus one that is essentially sampled, to get a little esoteric, it's like in the digital world, nothing really exists.
Right.
I mean, everything exists, but nothing exists. Everything's a representation of something. So really, it's almost less important it is important what you acquire, but it's more important how that material you acquired is actually displayed, because you can acquire something great, and as a viewer, I can screw it completely up. Which is very different than print or film was, where you were sort of locking in the process. But to your comment on Star Wars, there's subjective differences, there's workflow differences, and fortunately, if handled properly, there's a tremendous amount of benefits all through the processes as well. Everything from the ability to repurpose the content to, in the case of Star Wars, though people would argue, based on their own subjectivity of how they, perceive the first film, but, when Lucas and ILM went back, they were able to do all sorts of animated mats. They were able to take a lot of things that were very flat and two-dimensional and create more depth and motion.
It's too bad the movies weren't as good second time around as the first time. But I'm just saying.
My son loves the newer movies. I mean, he watches the old ones and he's fine with it, but the newer movies are his thing.
Because he likes the effects more than the actual story.
No, I just think it's geared a little different. I think it's a slightly different story.
I don't know when.
Admittedly, he hates Jar Jar because I told him to.
Yes.
I gave him a rule that he can watch as much Star Wars as he wants because we're that kind of house. But you can't love Jar Jar in my house.
That's funny.
I'm sorry.
No Jar Jar. No Jar Jar for you.
On one of your bios, it says that you are focused on convergence and integrated media, and I love that concept. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Certainly. It's, we've sort of been, in a sense, I guess, massaging the topic with even just talking about various different formats. the my background really, as I was sort of stating a moment ago, was focused on it shouldn't matter what screen, what medium, what format your story is being told on. Well, it matters to the end user. It might matter to cost. But from a production standpoint, what my focus has been in terms of convergence and in terms of integration, and I'll try to define the two. The convergence is really this overlap. I mean, one good example is the cord cutters that, including myself, that are watching so-called television, but we're watching it through the internet. So is that internet or is that television? It's kind of converged. It's the 2 points come together and the lines blur. And I think that we're actually, with that example, we're actually moving to a place where the next generation won't know any difference. TV will be based on the content. If it's even called TV, it might just be called, short form content, long form content. And the integration is, it's a subtle difference, but it is a fusion, but it's a little more complementary in terms of both being able to exist at the same time. So, for instance, you might have a film that is released theatrically in a digital format and also released as a Blu-ray and also released as some type of downloadable file format that you're going to save to your Roku or your Apple TV. So there's an integration of that. There's also an integration aspect to how we engage with content. So as content creators, oftentimes if we're, if we choose to, we can ignore it, but we have the ability to extend our stories into other spaces such as social media. So we can integrate now a social media component of a story, a video game component, a theatrical component, and integrate all of these aspects. There's a term transmedia, which the Producers Guild has actually accepted as an accredited title, transmedia producer, and it really speaks to the concept of transcending screens, transcending channels, and allowing your story to overlap and actually create an entire 360-degree holistic view of your content.
Now, Scott, one thing you mentioned right at the beginning is that you act as kind of a universal translator between all of the different groups that you deal with.
Yes.
Now, Kirsten and I have been in the media world for a long time, and my job is similar to yours in terms of I have to talk to a lot of different people on a daily basis, from clients to internal staff to artists to video editors. And sometimes it does have its challenges. And I'm curious what your take is on communicating with creatives versus communicating with, for example, management.
You're absolutely right, and it's. I think, as content creators, one of the questions that at least we should be asking ourselves is, who is our audience? And so even when, as individuals, we're dealing with projects, I tend to ask the same question: who is my audience, and what is their motivation? So management, which is critical to getting the project flow, well, in essence, managed, as well as the artistic process and the technical process, all working in unison, even though they may have, from their own perspectives, very different motivations. It's a delicate communication, and in some ways, to kind of generalize it, it could be, you have a young child, you have a senior citizen, and you have, the rest of the family all kind of trying to go on a trip, and you might have to communicate to the child, and a little differently, or the teenager differently. At the end of the day, you still need to get everybody to the end result, but the motivations are going to be different. Management is ideally, their focus is efficiency in terms of resources. Often money as a main motivator. And I find that, one of the things I try to focus on, and I've sort of rebranded myself in this day and age with consulting projects, is how to create an entire workflow that optimizes the resources you do have, so that you can get the most bang for your buck, if that's where your focus as management is. But it's a lot of it is also remembering, which I'm trying to also do now as I'm blabbering, is that it's less important what we say as what people hear.
Right. That's so true.
Yeah.
That's really good.
It's about the communication style and kind of your voice almost.
Yeah, and I mean, an example of that is that creatives often, well, it's going to sound, I don't mean to put down the creative process, but there's what I call a double-edged sword of sensitivity in the creative process. So sometimes, when we put on the creative hat, in order to be creative and to have empathy and to be able to feel our stories, we also can be a little sensitive. So you might want to communicate more like that child and
Yes.
coax them into the vehicle.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think that's the meaning at all. I think what that is communicating at levels that they understand more emotionally.
Yeah.
Because it is a
some
different.
people want
yeah.
an emotional connection in the language.
Yeah, it is a different type. I mean, I've had no real issue communicating with creatives, but I do notice it's very different from communicating with, let's say, programmer types or and like you said, the management types are usually looking for how fast can I get it done? Is it on budget? And does it do what I do? They don't really care how pretty it is. We've done some pieces that were gorgeous, and it comes back, we hate it because it looks too nice. And you just kind of shake your head and go, but don't you want it to look nice? No. Get rid of all the nice stuff and make it look really boring. Oh, gosh. And sometimes that's what you have to do. And, of course, that goes back to the creative types who just now feel like they've been killed. It's like, I did all that work for nothing. No, it wasn't for nothing. We appreciate it. However, the customer has a different mindset, and you just do what you just have to learn to deal with it. I tell them a lot, don't get over-attached to anything you do.
I'm looking off into the distance. That's not me at all. No, you've never said that to me.
Not to, did I? I don't think I did. Well, maybe I did.
Not this week, I will say.
No,
So
it's
what's
hard.
your current, well, I can't say what's your current project, but what's one of your current projects right now?
There's definitely a lot of balls in the air, one of them, I guess, to stay on the theme of balls in the air, is I've been working with, of all things, a guy named Chad Taylor, who goes by Mad Chad Taylor. He's a chainsaw juggler, longtime friend and actually creative collaborator. We did a home video together many years ago called The Axe of Venice Beach that I co-produced with him. And Chad makes a very good living traveling around the world as a performer. He also has a great film documentary that was shot all over the world called Buskers, because here in the States we often think of street performers as sort of homeless people making spare change, and the rest of the world actually addresses them as artists. Well, he came to me about probably a little over a year now ago and wanted my involvement to help create a niche channel, which is actually live now. We are massaging it, and we haven't technically done a true full launch, but 60secondtv.com, 60 and then 60 spelled out, tv.com, is a site that is an example of what I believe is sort of representational of the world we live in today, which is this kind of democratization of content that anybody with a niche, with an interest, can in essence create their own channel, can create their own network, can create their own content library.
Now, Scott, it's interesting. I'm going to be the devil's advocate on that one. Yes, it's democratization of content, but it's also the mediocratization of content. And we've had that discussion with Stephen Burns and others before who've been on, that there's a lot of bad content out there. There's a lot of really good content out there. And a lot of times the good content kind of gets overlooked because the bad content proliferates more.
It's shinier.
It's shinier. Yeah.
Well, it also goes to your management not knowing quality thing.
Right.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's, I often, when I look at myself and my own taste, I go, gee, I'm going to be relegated to PBS because that's, I'm an elitist audience.
They do nice stuff on PBS.
But again, that's sort of the beauty of having a multi-channel
Yes.
world is
Yeah.
that, you can surf to where you can watch what you want and Kirsten can go her way and I can go my way and we can all somehow find a common experience.
Sure.
So yeah, you're absolutely right, Rick. There is a muted sense of contrast, but my prediction is that as the tools have gotten better and better and better, at least from a visual and or a sensory place, I think we're going to start seeing a little more, evening of the playing field.
Right.
There's still, as a quote goes, going back to when the word processor first came out, and writers were all up in arms about how everyone was going to take their job. And I don't know who said it, but somebody said, but not everybody is Shakespeare.
Right.
So.
Well, you bring up a
fan
good
fiction. There's a few good fan fiction writers, and then there's a whole bunch of really nice people. And I read through, and every once in a while I come across a gem, and most of it I just go, oh God, honey, no.
But you made a point right at the beginning.
It's what happens when everybody can do it.
Yeah, and you made a point right at the beginning, which it doesn't matter how good or bad you are, it's really how well you can tell that story.
Yeah.
And that's the differentiator. You can see a million movies. How many are really well written? Most of them are formulaic. They just copy whatever happened before, especially when you get sequel after sequel after sequel after sequel. But there's still some really good story writers that just reach you, and those are the ones you go, wow, that's pretty amazing. But there aren't as many good story writers as there are just kind of average story writers.
Well, it's a skill.
Yeah, it is.
It's a skill. I'm going to actually transition this and ask you about equipment and technology. So you shepherd projects, you do workflows, you do project management. Is there a particular set of programs or technology that you bring, usually things that you fall back on, or is it different with every client and how you handle managing their project?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
I have my go-to tools. I equate it a bit to, if you're a carpenter, you're going to bring multiple, toolboxes, but I'm probably going to go to the hammer that I'm most comfortable using. However, if it's awkward in the hands of my client, then I'm going to quickly grab something they're more comfortable with. So my go-to tools, and again, there's a lot of steps in the process. So are we talking the development phase, the budgeting phase, the production phase, distribution? But I tend to work a lot with Adobe tools. Adobe, in my opinion, has consistently sort of played well with others. I think in some ways it's, to use the old Avis ad, it's like, when you're second best, you got to try harder. And for so long, in some arenas, Photoshop and Illustrator and certainly were the go-to, but certainly Premiere was not, for quite a while, considered at the same level of, let's say, Avid or Final Cut. And a lot of those issues, which that's a whole discussion in and of itself, but a lot of those things have moved on to where the Adobe suite or the Creative Cloud is, to use one of the terms we were talking about earlier, it's so integrated that the ability to kind of minimize issues with file format exchange or even operating system, because you can launch pretty much any one of their tools on a Windows machine, a Mac, a Linux. It's really agnostic in that sense. And I find it just works really well. But to the second part of that is that if I walk in and there's a studio that says, well, that's great that you love Adobe, we don't have a Creative Cloud subscription and we don't plan to, we've got, System X, then it's up to me to adapt and to work with it. And I think that's really the mantra I try to impress upon anybody, whether it's a student or a well-seasoned expert, is that at the core of it, what are we trying to accomplish,
right,
and how would we accomplish it if the tool we're used to didn't exist?
Yep, that's a good point.
And then apply whatever that technique is to the tool, and that's where efficiency comes from.
Now you've worked obviously with Final Cut Pro. You talked about it several times. It went through an enormous transition that I think took a lot of editors by surprise. Now, I was not a Final Cut Pro or Premiere guy. I was a Vegas guy for a long time, and then I got out of Vegas. I'm back to Premiere because Premiere actually got good. I didn't like it in the old days.
Yeah.
But it's funny because Premiere only really rose once Apple killed Final Cut Pro 7. And it's interesting to see how that all transitioned, and a lot of editors still abhor Final Cut Pro X or 10. I don't think it's that bad. It's just more visual. It's different. I wish some of the things in Final Cut Pro 10 made their way to Premiere. Maybe eventually they'll get there. But what's your take on that for the as video editors or a producer? How did you feel about that transition?
I was less married to a particular system, so when the Hollywood community kind of went up in arms and felt as if, they were abandoned by Apple, I was a little bit smug, if anything, and I was like, well, that's, you made yourself a Final Cut Pro editor rather than an editor
right,
that happens to use this tool. It goes back to that analogy I was using with the car. It's that if you learn to drive in a Chevy and tomorrow all we have are Toyotas, can you still drive? And it kind of amazes me that a lot of folks that were so stuck on the tool
right,
said, oh my God, I can't even do my job any longer. What am I going to do? I think as a society, we confuse technique and process with the tool.
right.
A lot of that is the way things are marketed. But to some of your very astute comments on the different systems, number one, Apple made a business decision, and I think in the large scope, a wise business decision. They looked at a Hollywood community that may have had, even if you extend the concept of Hollywood to a global sense, maybe there's 10 million installed users. We tend to be high maintenance clients. We don't always pay for upgrades. We want everything, and we're not very flexible. We want it to work the way we expect it to work. And then there were 50 million plus iMovie users that, from a business standpoint, they could upgrade to what I've often called iMovie Pro or Final Cut X, that they looked at a market decision. And if it wasn't, this is my opinion, what I'm about to say, but if it wasn't for Hollywood having such a loud voice and a very present voice in terms of people paying attention, I don't think our whininess would have really even been recognized. I think they would have stuck to we're done with that, we're moving on.
Right.
But because there was a lot of noise, they said, okay, we'll find a way to make it work. FCPX, it's interesting. I got stuck doing, stuck's probably not the right word, but I resisted using it for a long time. And then there was a project I was on that I just, because of the structure of the way the system works, I was inheriting a project that I couldn't easily convert out of Final Cut 10. So I just said, you know what, let me just jump in and work with it. It's probably going to sound weird, but if you just forget everything that you've ever known about editing and you start from scratch, it's like you said, Rick, it actually has some very nice features.
Yeah.
The best way I've heard it summed up, and I can't take credit for this comment, actually a very brilliant guy that many of your audience and you guys may know, Michael Cioni, who has a company, Light Iron Digital. And the way he talks about it is he says that that Final Cut itself, or Premiere or Avid, that they're editing systems that happen to have some asset management, and that Final Cut 10 is really an asset management system that happens to have some timeline editing in it.
That's great.
Oh,
That's a good way to
that's
put
an
it.
interesting way of looking at it.
And we've had Larry Jordan on, who's been heavily involved in video and editing and everything. He teaches a lot of these things. And his comment was, Final Cut Pro is taking a new paradigm of a visual approach that reaches a different generation. And he said Premiere and all the others are still doing a much more traditional approach that is totally non-visual oriented. I go, there's a certain point of truth to that, because I think Final Cut Pro X is probably the most visual I've seen of an editing tool that's at the higher end. And all the other ones tend to be,
Premiere has certainly made some evolutions.
It's getting there.
Said, the interface has certainly changed. Their media browser.
Much better now.
Yeah, their ability to hover scrub over clips is fantastic. And just a couple of weeks ago, they publicly released Premiere Clip, which is a free app that you can get from the iPhone store.
Interesting.
And it allows you to edit complete Premiere sequences on your phone or tablet.
Interesting.
And sync it back to your full version of Premiere. So, again, what I really like about the way Adobe plays and structures stuff is they want you to be able to kind of have a creative profile that you can access and be able to express yourself across any device, regardless of where you are in the world, and be able to integrate and sync it all back and share it and integrate it. And in fact, there are a number of times where I've taken both Final Cut outputs as well as Avid outputs and brought them into Premiere, and they sync, quite well. I mean, nearly, I don't want to say 100% of everything comes through, but I could confidently say, 90 to 95% of your entire sequence, especially if it's pretty much straightforward cuts, dissolves, and standardized effects, will all come right back. So I think to kind of, add my summation 2 cents on this area is that at the end of the day, if you're a content creator, if you're a storyteller, maybe specifically an editor, I would say, could you tell a story if you had a piece of celluloid and a sharp rock, and if tomorrow, we are projecting holograms out of our eyeballs into 3D caves, that you should be able to apply your same technique onto the new tool. And that is really the stepping process between traditional legacy media and today's media, or taking sort of you guys probably have heard the terms, maybe even used them, the digital immigrant versus the digital native. And that just like any immigrant to a new world, it's how much are you going to resist the culture and the language that the natives are born into. And if you embrace it, you can actually go further, because you can take the structure and foundation of what you have and apply it now into the new tool, and you really are the most efficient of anybody.
And it's interesting because the new immigrant who actually does embrace it usually succeeds a lot more because they're hungrier. And they know where they came from. So it's sort of interesting. Well, we are at the end of our show, and Scott, we got to promise to get you back, because it's been fun, and I know we're only touching the surface on
and
things.
I have more questions.
And she has a lot more questions, so.
I'm more than happy anytime. It's been a real honor, and love your show. I got a chance to watch some of the episodes, see some of my contemporaries, and learn a few things as well.
Oh, great.
Excellent.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on.
We appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure, anytime.
And if you are watching in the chat room, please subscribe. You can look at the top or the bottom. There's some follow us buttons. And if you're watching on Vimeo, we're actually moving off Vimeo. We're going to be going to Podbean very shortly, so that way we can get on iTunes, because we can't get on iTunes from Vimeo. We tried. There's no
Vimeo is a
RSS
little
feeds.
hard to play with.
They don't play. They play in their sandboxes. Great quality, but unfortunately, we're moving to Podbean. And that'll give us a little bit more exposure. And we used to be on them originally, but they weren't good in those days. They've gotten a lot better. So we appreciate you being there. Please subscribe and give us your feedback. This show will actually go up on Podbean later today. So again, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. And one of these days, we've got to get together. We're not that far from each other.
I welcome it. Where you are is a beautiful area of the country. My dog and I will come up and run on the beach with you.
Oh, great. That sounds good. I've got 2 dogs, so I don't know if I can get them to the beach. They're afraid of everything. So we're working on it. They were rescues. We're working on it. I think they were abused, but we're not sure.
I think a lot of us were abused,
Yeah.
but we find a way to work with that.
That's right.
How did I know you were going there?
Well,
We share the same process of fun and dysfunction.
Yes. The same sense of humor always works.
Yes, indeed. So,
good.
no, this has been great, and I welcome any of your viewers to reach out to me, write to me, and if I can answer other questions for anybody, I always enjoy.
Actually, we can put
doing
that,
so.
if you want, in the show notes. What's the best place for them to reach you?
By email is probably the best.
Through your website?
Yeah. In fact, if you go to the www.scary, which is scary with 2 R's, .com, there's you can pretty much get to any one of my what I refer to as digital leashes, and find a way to email, subscribe, follow me, track me, stalk me, whatever they.
It's the
Well,
welcome.
we are in Southern California, so this is all actually possible.
Yeah.
So-
Thanks. Now I won't sleep at night. But,
All right, and on that creepy note, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.